Hello and welcome. We are joined here by Ms. Jyotsna Puri. She is the Associate Vice President, Strategy and Knowledge Department at the Rome-based International Fund for Agricultural Development. Welcome to PTI, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Kunal, for having me here. It's really a pleasure.
The 37th International Conference of Agricultural Economists is taking place in India after 65 years. What has been some of the takeaways for India and the outcomes of this global conclave, if you could share with us?
Great question. So actually, I'm just coming from the conference as well. And I think one I really want to underscore as to what a thing of pride it is that the Prime Minister decided to engage with the conference and to really be there at the opening and to be inaugurating the conference, because I think it really underscores for India as well as for the rest of the world as to how important the Prime Minister and the rest of the government finds agriculture in this space where we are talking about food insecurity and hunger and malnourishment. So I think other than the highlighting that that's doing, I think it's also pointing to the fact that despite us all sort of backslapping ourselves and congratulating ourselves for being a developed world, what we are witnessing today in terms of more than 750 million people really encountering and facing hunger, which is 1 in 11 people are essentially facing hunger today. Second, the fact that more than 2.8 billion people are not able to access nutritious food or healthy food also means that it's really a travesty as to the fact that we are not doing sufficiently or enough in terms of something as basic as food security and in terms of nutrition security. And I think the presence of the Prime Minister at this conference really underscored as to how important it is on one side that we've got to pay far more attention to food security and nutrition, but also to the overall consequence that we are witnessing of food production in the world today. So food systems or agri-food systems are also responsible for 1/3 of the overall emissions in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So it is a big contributor to climate change, but it also therefore represents an opportunity for finding win-win-win options that we wouldn't otherwise, right? So the fact that yes, agri-food systems are contributing to 1/3 of the overall emissions, but that they also are responsible, smallholder farmers are responsible for 1/3 of the overall food that we eat, also means that we are capable of finding solutions, and that a big thrust of our solution finding should be in the agriculture sector. And my last point here, I think, is really in terms of focusing on what is the key challenge. The key challenge is clearly, one of the key challenges is in terms of financing. Clearly, we've got to do more, and I'm hoping we can talk about that.
So were you able to, or was the conclave able to get to identify some of these action points during the course of the discussions?
So the ICAE is a great way to bring together really what is world expertise or global expertise in the context of agriculture, and what economists are helping you to do is to really deal with the question of trade-offs, right? The problem occurs because it's a wicked problem. On one side, you want to produce more food, but on the other side, you also want to deal with some of the environmental challenges and the equity challenges that we face. The conclave is bringing together expertise, papers, findings, data, measurement, analysis on a whole host of issues that are really putting up front and center in a very manifest way how we deal with the challenge of food security on one case, climate and environment on the second, and equity on the third, because I think all three of those are really interconnected. And what the conference is bringing forward are, for example, we've got to do a whole lot better in terms of measurement, in terms of really understanding what is the impact that this is making on food security and on climate in the first case. Second, what are the financing solutions that are available that help us to bridge what are otherwise very siloed sectors: food security, health, agricultural production, health, climate, and financing, right? There are different ministries that deal with this, but clearly you've got to bring all of those ministries together, health, agriculture, infrastructure, finance, together to really then try and address what is a wicked problem in the context of nutrition and food security.
How do you see the growth of India as an agriculture-dominated country in the past few decades, as it embraces new technology and fosters innovation.
Yeah. So look, on the global scale, we are witnessing that there has been an increase in hunger and access to, or lack of access to, healthy food. But India is sort of bucking the trend, right? So we are seeing actually that number fall in terms of 16.3 or 16.4% to 13.3%. So we are bucking the trend. We are actually, India as a country is actually able to say that yes, the percentage of people that are facing hunger today is reducing. So that's one. Second, with the overall push that the Prime Minister is making with respect to infrastructure investments, I think we are recognizing that it's really the midstream of the value chain that you really have to focus on if you really want to get to the bottom of understanding as to what can be a solution. And so that requires infrastructure investments, roads, buildings, storage facilities, digital public infrastructure, technology, and therefore innovation. The third is, I think, the Prime Minister's thrust on also information technology, right? So the fact that yes, you can have a farmer essentially, I mean, 10 years ago, I was going and looking at rural areas in India, and we were seeing that farmers, just for NREGA payments, used to take 2 to 3 days to get to a brick and mortar building, show their identity card, and still just to access the money that they needed out of NREGA. That's changed now. With the digitization and the monetization that we are witnessing in India, you can do that in seconds. And that's huge. That's almost transformational if we really want to think about, how the change in infrastructure is really making not just money available to people who deserve it most, but also is making these financial services accessible to farmers. But I think the third challenge, the third thing that I really want to point out is the challenge that remains in this space. The challenge that still remains in this space is that smallholder farmers, and most food in India is still produced by the smallholder farmer, right? So smallholder is defined as those anyone cultivating plots of land less than 5 hectares. Most of our food is produced by those agricultural farmers. Most new climate finance, for example, does not go to those smallholder farmers, and that's a travesty. I mean, that's indefensible, because we need to really highlight the plight of those vulnerable, marginalized farmers that mostly occupy the informal sector within India, and really need to bring them into the spotlight when we are thinking about climate finance.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his address at the conference, said that there was a time when India's food security was a global concern, but now India is providing solution for food and nutrition security. Your thoughts on that, please?
Absolutely. So let's say, the fact that we were able to, I'm saying we, but India was able to, and the Prime Minister was able to raise the profile of adaptive crops and millets, for example. I mean, so much has been written about it, but I think what it gets to the bottom of is really recognizing the importance of indigenous crops and native crops that have otherwise been ignored. And this is happening not just in India, and as a consequence of the highlight of the spotlight being provided to adaptive and indigenous crops, we are, for example, IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, who I represent, we're also focusing on adaptive crops in other parts of Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, as well as in the Pacific Islands, because there are crops that are indigenous, that are far more resilient, that are far more needy or far less needy of water, for example, and therefore far more environmentally friendly, that can provide us with both food and nutrition solutions on one side, but also environmental solutions. So that's one, adaptive or neglected or otherwise neglected and underutilized species is possibly one solution. But the other solution is also recognizing that we've got to think about digital infrastructure as a possible innovation that can be scaled up, that can really take markets to the farmer.
Artificial intelligence is fundamentally changing the way we look at the world and the way we interact with the world. What do you feel is the role AI can play in not only augmenting agriculture globally, but also ensuring welfare of farmers?
Yeah. So let's break down what AI is helping us do. It's not as if We don't have satellite images. It's not like we don't have GIS disaggregated data. It's not like we don't have survey data. We have all of that, right? But what AI helps you to do is to put all of those information sources, those that is collected through surveys, very, very laboriously collected surveys, with real-time data, with photographic data, with GIS data, with landscape level, highly disaggregated data, combine all of those sources and to really make sense of it, right? And that is the power of AI. It's helping us to combine different types, different resolutions, and different protocols of data collection into one, and then also help us to infer. Now, that's the power of it. But that's also a challenge. Why is that a challenge? Because when we are taking an AI algorithm, we want to be able to train it on data that gives us the representative solution or the representative inference, right? So if we don't have primary data that is, for example, been trained, that is focusing on, say, marginalized group, indigenous groups, women, children, there's nothing that AI, that large language models are otherwise going to do automatically that is going to be able to give us inferences that are credible unless they have been trained on primary data that are also looking at, you know, the condition of women, the condition of children, the condition of marginalized groups. So that's why, while we are talking about the power of AI, we've got to recognize that with AI, a lot of the other biases are in danger of getting snowballed unless we are very careful. So we've got to marry Gen AI, generative AI, with still primary data collection and inference, because guess what? Otherwise, our biases will get compounded.
Ms. Puri, you know, we just saw what happened in a country like Bangladesh. You know, it has descended into political turmoil, absolute chaos. And being a South Asian country also, it's a lot of farmers make their livelihood in that country. What do you think will be the impact of this crisis on the farmers of Bangladesh?
A big question. I mean, there are political stability questions, obviously, that are associated with that. But I think to the extent, and Bangladesh is not the only country going through political turmoil. Obviously, it's the nearest to India, and there is a big relationship that we have with Bangladesh. But if we were to draw an inference from other countries that have gone into turmoil, I think we've got to take a lesson from what has worked in terms of conflict situations and fragile situations. And what works are markets, right? So if we can really take a lesson or a page from that book, there are so many countries that we work in Africa which are fragile and conflict affected. And what works there are, you've got to work with social assistance, but cash transfers work. You've got to work with building local markets and not so much long value chains. Those are there to stay. But I think recognizing that farmers, that indigenous people, that poor people, people who are really struggling to be food secure and income secure, are really dependent on local markets. I think the big inference that I want to take away for in terms of food and nutrition security and food sovereignty is really recognizing that we've got to keep investing in markets that are local, that are regional, because at the end of time, finally, that's what gives stability to our nutrition and to our food security.
But do you feel that if this situation, which doesn't seem to be settling down in the next couple of months, you know, a lot of things are going to be impacted. The economy, of course, will be hit. So agriculture being linked to that, do you feel there will be immediate fallout of that on the livelihood of farmers in Bangladesh? Or
yes,
similar countries which are also facing?
Absolutely. And I think and it is because of that turmoil and that conflict and, you know, the increase in food prices that we are going to see, because yes, we are going to witness a lot of disruption, right? So local markets will be disrupted, and because of the impending sense of increased risk, not only is it local markets, but we are also going to see, hopefully not, but there is going to be an impact on perceptions of risk for, say, foreign direct investment. So commercial investors that are coming into Bangladesh and other countries, and we've seen this play out before, right? there is going to be an increased perception of risk. There is going to be an increased perception of risk of return. And I think those are the things that we've got to guard against and to really reassure the external investor that, look, your investments are secure, that there is going to be repayment, that there is going to be a return on investment. And if we can, therefore, the fundamental part of this is, a large part of the conflict that we are seeing occurring in Bangladesh is because of something very basic: income, the importance of livelihoods, right? If we can, so local markets, but also recognizing as to how agriculture can be a very important provider of incomes and therefore of security and resilience, I think can also be a very important contributor to increased stability, because we're focusing on the formal market and formal jobs in government sectors, which is exactly essentially what acted as the spark to a large part of the instability that we are witnessing today. But let's go back a little bit and see as to if we could have increased the opportunity within the agriculture sector and the sector that has become really important in Bangladesh, that could also absorb and give a lot of new jobs and opportunities for enterprises. And we are witnessing this not only in India. The increase in the percentage of small and medium enterprises in India has gone through the roof. This is happening in Africa as well. And so providing those incentives for these kinds of enterprises also acts as an incentive for youth to stay and really leverage the opportunities that exist in rural areas. And I think I just want to put it out there. Look, we have so far always thought of rural areas and of the farming sector and of ag sector as sort of subservient to the interests of urban structures and formal sectors. But what if we saw that as an opportunity? If we can ensure that our investments are making rural areas connected, equitable, resilient, and prosperous, we're going to see a rural transformation which is providing the opportunity for growth and for jobs in rural areas. And then you don't need to see the kinds of conflicts that we are witnessing today.
This international conference aims to tackle the pressing need for sustainable agriculture in the face of global challenges such as climate change, natural resource degradation, rising production costs, and conflict. Has any blueprint come out of this conference so far?
So thanks, Kunal, great question. And I was going to refer to this actually earlier as well. One of the key things that we are recognizing is the huge potential for agroecology and for agroforestry and agrobiodiversity and regenerative agriculture or circular agriculture, right? Irrespective of what name you give it, I think one thing that we're recognizing is that smallholder farmers tend to be far more diverse, both in terms of the crops that they cultivate, but also in terms of the production techniques that they employ, where they are bringing in far more agroecological friendly techniques than large-scale farmers do that are usually plantation and or cash crop producers. So I think, the widespread recognition that if we focus on smallholder farmers as not only as a source of income, but also as the opportunity to reduce the environmental impact, but also as a environmental plus agent where they are able to really invest in regenerative agriculture or agroecology, I think that's the opportunity we've got to see. But again, as an economist here, I think what what I do want to alert ourselves to while exploiting that opportunity is that for smallholder farmers, agroecology is all very good. There are voluntary guidelines now for agroecology, for example. But what are the attribute for agroecology is, for example, 100% vegetative cover throughout the year, 365 days, no tillage, ensuring that seeds are being produced from the crops that you're cultivating, ensuring that there is multiple cropping. That requires labor markets to be active. That also requires your financial markets to be active. But in most areas, rural areas, because this is mostly informal, you don't have access to finance, you don't have access to labor, and you don't have access to inputs and or fertilizers. These are basic things. And again, like I said, it's almost a tragedy that in 2024, we are still talking about some of the things that Professor Amartya Sen spoke about during the Great Bengal famine, where a large part of the famine occurred not because we weren't producing enough in India, but because markets were failing, our distribution systems were failing. we're talking about the same thing today.
According to IFAD's estimation, the growing population will exceed 9 billion by 2050. Besides the widening gap between the rich and the poor, and the access for resources, or rather the competing access for resources, what are some of the challenges that you feel that humanity faces in this particular sector?
Globally?
Yeah,
Well, I mean, perhaps I just sort of keep it within the agriculture and the food security space.
Yeah.
Or, yeah. So I think the important thing is recognizing as to how we can really use the ability that we have, the systems ability as well as the innovation ability to really galvanize and mobilize investments. Yeah? So I want to give you a couple of examples where we are innovating. We are putting out, for example, nutrition bonds. Nutrition bonds are bonds where we are working with private sector and commercial entities to say that the proceeds of those bonds will be invested in nutrition-friendly activities, but at the smallholder level, right? That is an innovation. We are talking today about debt swaps for climate, debt swaps for nature. But one of the key questions that I have in my head is, why aren't we talking about debt swaps for hunger, or debt swaps for nutrition, or debt swaps for healthy food, right? So this is essentially saying to countries that, look, we really value food security, we really value food, we really value healthy food, and we need to be doing far more and designing financial modalities like that. But my last sort of clarion call really in this space is the responsibility that the private sector is showing, or perhaps the lack thereof, right? Look, we've got in a survey that was done by one of the international agencies a couple of years ago, they were looking at the top 350 food and beverage commercial entities of the world that are responsible for half of the overall food and beverage related GDP globally. What did they find? They found that those entities, and I won't name the names of these firms, but they're extremely well known and they're household names, they were not paying attention to the nutrition quality of the food that they're putting out globally, and they're not paying sufficient attention to health and or labor or equity amongst its labor class, and that's not good. So I think it becomes the responsibility also of international organizations like ours to not only ensure that, look, there is a focus on equity and connectedness for the farmer or the one that might otherwise get left behind, not just creating the incentives for the commercial sector to come and invest in this, but also ensuring that we are setting the standard for what is a commercial sector investment in this area, which is that commercial investment and retail investment, related investment, must focus on the quality of food. Because this is the last mile. We can put out lots of junk food, that's not good enough, right? We've got to ensure that the quality is really good.
What efforts or interventions rather that IFAD has made along with other global agencies, besides efforts made by various countries nationally to eradicate hunger?
Yeah, and so thank you. And you know, it's a great question again. There was a report that just came out from UNCTAD which talked about the indebtedness of more than approximately 54 countries, where just the interest payment that these countries are making as a consequence of lending or borrowing that they've done is more than what they are spending on health and education. That again is indefensible. So I think what IFAD is doing is recognizing that, look, there are low-income countries where it's clearly important to be providing both grants as well as highly concessional loans, so that the debt repayment load is actually, or the burden is very reduced. Second, recognizing that we've got to really innovate with respect to our financial modalities. So when we are putting together, say, blended platforms where, for example, IFAD is focusing, just to give you an example, we are putting together a dairy platform in Africa, right? A dairy platform where different funders are coming together, taking the first loss risk. That is, so if the recipients default on their loans, those investors are willing to take that risk and not have repayment. So there are some class of investors that are ready to do that. And yet there are other sorts of investors who are not ready to take on the risk, but who are ready to take sort of a cut on the return of their investment. They take the more senior tranche in that loan. But bringing all these types of investors that have different risk profiles into these blended platforms can be a really important and exciting way of putting out concessional loans that are in turn also greening the environment, but really catering to the sections of society that are otherwise vulnerable and left behind. And also recognizing, so this dairy platform, for example, is investing in low methane livestock, right? So low methane livestock means you're influencing the fodder that is going, you're influencing the pasture and the grazing arrangements that are really being practiced on the ground on one side, but you're also ensuring that they are incentivized, that those farmers, those livestock herders are being incentivized in the way they look after their herds, in the way they feed them, to ensure that there is lesser methane coming out of their livestock herds than would have otherwise. So it's a win-win-win solution for everyone.
This project is for entire African continent, or is this
No,
parts?
so currently we're piloting that in 4 countries. And we're going to be, once we have evidence on, the scale of those operations, then the idea is, the ambition is
Which are these 4 countries, Ms. Puri?
So I think it's Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania.
Okay, and what is the name of this project again?
I want to say it's DIMA, but we are also going to be, so it's the DIMA project, but we will be also looking at, there's a slight name change that might be.
And when was it launched, the pilot?
We started to look at it, I think last year.
Okay, and can you share details of some of the latest projects that IFAD is currently engaged in from sub-Saharan Africa to India?
So look, in sub-Saharan Africa and in Africa, we've also launched what is called the Africa Rural Climate Adaptation Financing Mechanism, which again is a blended platform that is looking at, a whole set of countries and working with the private sector, so with a bank which is called Equity Bank, and putting together this blended platform. In India, as well as in Nepal, as well as in Bangladesh, we are also investing, we are taking grant resources, and we are also galvanizing resources from other environmental funders like the GEF, like the GCF, and like Adaptation Fund, and we blend that with also what are our program of loans to increase the concessionality of the lending that we do, so that we can really get to the low-income farmer. Just another example is that in Nepal, where I think an entire grant program from our Adaptation for Smallholder Farmers program, so ASAP, that is more than $30 million, an entire grant program that has been put out, which has shown with the help of data that we are making a significant impact on the livelihoods of farmers out there, right? In Kiribati, we are seeing similar impacts with respect to our investments on the ground.
Ms. Puri, if you could like to share your message, or rather what is your message for the farmers of India?
I think what I would like to say to the farmers of India is that when we are dealing with governments of any kind, ensure that you're participating and that you're holding your voice. Because when farmers speak, the world listens. Yeah, we heard that with, we heard that in India last year. And we are hearing that in international circles as well, because when I go to the COP, for example, benefit sharing and the fact that there needs to be investment in adaptation, this is a clarion call that we are hearing, and we are vocalizing primarily because farmers and those that are otherwise neglected are speaking up.
So you want them to continue to
speak up, feel empowered, and ask for benefit sharing. Because it's not okay for commercial entities and large net worth individuals to be benefiting from the pathway of progress and development that we are seeing. That benefit sharing is not only a right, it is an entitlement for farmers, and they have to ask for it in a persistent, consistent, patient, strong way.
Ms. Puri, thank you so much for talking to PTI and sparing a time out during your presence here in India for the conference. Thank you and all the best.
Thank you so much, Kunal. Such a pleasure to be here.